Welcome to Lesky, a podcast on new ideas in ancient Greek studies. I'm your host, Johanna Hanning, and I'm a classicist at Brown University. When I was younger, there was a famous song that I was totally missing the point of. The song I'm talking about is Luck Be a Lady, which features in the musical Guys and Dolls, but most people probably know best from the Sinatra crooner version. Before I listened to the song beyond the first line, I used to assume that the singer was hoping that luck would bring him a lady tonight. I think it wasn't until 5 or 6 years ago when I actually went to Las Vegas for the first time that I had my eureka moment about the lyrics. In the song, the singer is actually, of course, personifying luck as a woman, as Lady Luck, and he's begging her to stay by his side and not leave him for another gambler. As the song goes, a lady doesn't leave her escort, it isn't fair, it isn't nice. A lady doesn't wander all over the room and blow on some other guy's dice. So this song really goes all the way in terms of personifying luck. And that was something that, of course, happened in Greek antiquity too. Luck, or Tyche, appears as a minor goddess already in Hesiod. But it's not until the Hellenistic period that her following and her personification really take off. In Hellenistic representations, Tyche is often depicted holding a ship's rudder to guide human affairs, or a wheel to show how quickly fortunes could spin, or a cornucopia to signify sudden wealth and good luck. Nearly every new Hellenistic city, so think Antioch, Alexandria, adopted her as a protector, and because of her association with cities, she was often depicted wearing a mural crown, that is, a crown shaped like the city's own defensive walls. Even before that, the standard inscription Agathe Tyche, with good fortune, had begun appearing on public monuments in Athens, but in the Hellenistic period, the formula exploded across the Mediterranean, and it became a kind of legal header that polis used to validate almost every official law, treaty, and public alliance. None of this, though, should lead us to believe that there was some single ancient Greek take on luck. My guest for this episode, Daniel Schillinger, has just published a book that grapples with several ancient texts that cast luck in a quite different light. The book is called Luckless, The Idea of Luck in Ancient Greek Thought, and it just came out in spring with Oxford University Press. In it, Daniel challenges the way we normally think about how the Greeks, and I say that again in scare quotes, thought about luck and fortune. He argues that for many of the writers and thinkers at work in 5th and 4th century Athens, luck wasn't some external force operating out there in the universe. Rather, it was an intense human intellectual and or emotional reaction to circumstances, an attempt to name and make sense of confluences and coincidences that otherwise seem to defy understanding. Now, it's probably human nature, especially when things don't go our way, to chalk things up to some external force, whether we call that force Tyche or Lady Luck. But Daniel's book invites us to think with a variety of 5th and 4th century authors, Herodotus and Sophocles, Thucydides and Euripides, Plato and Aristotle, about the psychological phenomenon of luck and its political, ethical, and philosophical reverberations far beyond the casino floor. Daniel Schillinger is a lecturer in political science at Yale University, where he teaches in the Directed Studies program and offers seminars on Greek political thought. He is also a senior fellow of the Yale Center for Civic Thought and a recipient of the Lux et Veritas Teaching Prize. Just a quick reminder that, as ever, I have put some bibliography in the show notes for this episode. And again, that Lesky is on Instagram, at Lesky Podcast, and that's where I post announcements of new episodes, so you might want to give a follow there. And, of course, tell your friends about the podcast. Now, I'd like to welcome into the Lesky Daniel Schillinger. The next voice you'll be hearing is his.
The book began in graduate school. It's the first book, maybe you can tell. And it began with my reading of Thucydides. In the scholarly literature on Thucydides, Thucydides is often presented as a thinker and a writer who provides for the reader the experience, the concrete experience of chance, and in that experience, a kind of correction of the power of reason. So scholars like Adam Parry, and I quote some of these lines in the book, says things like, in Thucydides, you see that man's attempt to master the world by the intellect will founder on the shoals of the world or outside things or actuality. Bernard Williams says in a well-known line that Thucydides shows rationality at risk to chance. H.P. Stahl says similar things. So there were all these pessimistic readings of Thucydides out there, and central to these readings was this idea that you see and even sort of feel the power of chance as something external in Thucydides. And when I was reading the book, I didn't really see that at all. It seemed to me that Thucydides was so much more interested in what we could call the psychology of luck or chance, how it stirs up emotions, how it's used as a piece of rhetoric. It never seemed to be out there in the world, like sinking ships in the way that these guys suggested. And that raised a question for me about, one, a kind of theoretical question about what luck itself is. Is it something out there in the world? Is it instead somehow lodged within us and our perceptions of and speech about the world? And it also raised questions about how we read the history of political thought and Greek political thought, because there are many people who suggest that we should go back to the Greeks because they somehow show us that we're vulnerable to luck or chance. Martha Nussbaum's The Fragility of Goodness makes this point throughout, and it begins by approaching luck in exactly the same way these scholars of Thucydides were approaching it. Luck is external happening. It's things outside of us that we don't control. So I didn't see this in Thucydides. And then when I went to other Greek thinkers, I didn't really see it there either. So I went to Aristotle, to his account of luck in the Physics, and it seemed to me that there too, luck was in speech rather than in deed. If we want to use that sort of Greek formulation, it was a description of action that seemed to be inexplicable, even though it was the sort of thing that you might have planned to do had you been able to, but you couldn't really explain why it happened. And yet it was important for your flourishing. It was the sort of thing you would have chosen to avoid. So I guess I started to think, well, maybe there's this whole alternate approach to these questions in Greek political thought that's so much more skeptical and psychological than people have seen. And again, that seemed important for understanding the idea itself, for telling a story about why we go back to these texts in the first place. And then also, within my sort of history of political thought theory world, I'm trained as a political theorist. There are big stories that we tell about the history of political thought. And one is that beginning in early modernity with people like Machiavelli, there was an aspiration to conquer fortune. Whereas in ancient thought, there's always a kind of sensitivity to the power of fortune over human beings. And I wasn't sure that was quite right. It seemed to me that if that was the case about someone like Thucydides, it was the case because he thought we'd have trouble conquering ourselves and not something out there in the world called fortune that was messing with us from outside.
Yeah, I was really interested actually in that Machiavelli passage that you quote in the introduction. Maybe you could just summarize it.
Sure. Yeah. And maybe I could also say that the book begins with my attention to Thucydides and my attention to Machiavelli. Maybe it's the two of them side by side in graduate school that planted the seed of the book. Okay, so in chapter 25 of Machiavelli's Prince, he offers this amazing image of fortune as a river. So you can imagine you live next to the Arno or the Nile, and sometimes it floods, and that seems to be awful, serious misfortune. It ruins your crops. It maybe kills people. Why does this happen? You don't know. Maybe it's just bad luck. Maybe it's the work of the gods. Maybe those two are compatible. But for Machiavelli, once you realize that fortune is really just the ambiguous relation of nature to human beings, to human happiness, human purposes. Once you realize that it's natural for this river to flood during the rainy season every year, it no longer seems to be awful bad luck. It just seems to be an instance of natural necessity that can be predicted and controlled to a great extent. So Machiavelli says you can build dikes and dams, which will make the bad luck, no longer threatening. It may even make it useful. If those dikes and dams channel the water toward your crops, suddenly what appeared to be bad luck, with the right interpretation of nature, becomes benign and maybe even helpful. So Machiavelli will say things elsewhere, like in the Discourses on Livy, it's only where human beings lack virtue that fortune shows its power.
I have to say, I have a 3-year-old. I think I told you I have a 3-year-old, and this really makes me think, because currently he's obsessed with the Three Little Pigs, right? And it seems that what Machiavelli is really saying is it's just on you to do that work and build your house of brick, right? And not of hay and not of sticks, because a wolf will come along one day, and, it's like the little piggies who built their house of hay and straw and sticks and whatever. It's on them because they didn't work hard enough to shore up against that. It's like a virtue lesson for when the bad luck of the wolf eventually happens, necessarily will. Then you're okay if you took the time to. In any case, I thought that it was just funny that Machiavelli kind of seemed to me to boil down to the moral of the Three Little Pigs.
Totally. You need to make preparation. I mean, right. In explaining this passage to my students, I'll sometimes say, if you write me 5 minutes before a paper is due and say, I'm having computer trouble, I can't, no, from a Machiavellian perspective, the paper should just be done, and then this wouldn't be an issue. So I think that's right. I mean, I don't know if this is where you want to go, but the difference, it seems to me, between someone like Machiavelli and Thucydides is that Machiavelli concludes from the fact that fortune can be reduced to nature's motions and human action. The perception of fortune can be reduced to these things, that we should be able to conquer it, right? You should be able to make those preparations. And I don't think that's where someone like Thucydides ends up, because he thinks that we're not going to be able fully to control ourselves, that you can't construct dikes and dams within human beings to channel their own emotions so perfectly that they'll always be prepared for whatever comes.
Well, what does Aristotle say luck even is? And actually, maybe the question that I really have for you, to start with thinking about Aristotle and luck, Tuche in this case, why does he talk about it in the physics of all places?
Yeah, I mean, so after, outlining his fourfold framework of idea, of explanations or causes, we get yet another one, right? So then luck enters as a cause, catus symbibicos, right? As a cause that is somehow accidental or incidental or contingent. And I think this is important because there are things that happen to us, and sometimes very consequential things, that can't be readily explained. And Aristotle wants to say, right, that we have to have a way to talk about these things. And we do, right? Aristotle always wants to save the phenomena. He wants to explain how people speak about the world. And sometimes we say things happen, kata tukane, just by luck. Okay, what sorts of things? I think Aristotle says that we recur to this language when we can't really explain why something has happened in the usual ways, right? But we still need to say something about it. So like an example that he offers is you go to the agora, you go to the marketplace, and you find there someone who owes you a bunch of money, and you had no idea that person was going to be there, but you recover the debt. I mean, you could to put that in terms more recognizable to us, like if we ran into each other at the clock at Grand Central Station, and we had no time because we were each catching trains. And I was like, oh, Johanna's here. Why are you there right now? We didn't have time to say. I can't even explain why she's there and how we ended up crossing paths. It seems so unlikely, but also cool, because had I known, I might have suggested that we meet at the clock for a second. So yeah, I think Aristotle wants to say that this is the way we talk about events, outcomes that shadow deliberation and choice. They're the sorts of things that we might have planned but didn't, and we can't really explain. The explanations, could be many. How did we end up at the clock? I don't know. You were going to a conference or you were going to see family. I would have to ask you. At the same time, I think Aristotle wants to say, and he does say in Physics 2.5, that strictly speaking, luck is not an explanation or a cause. It causes nothing. He says he agrees with Democritus on this point. What does that mean in relation to our examples? You could tell a precise explanatory, you could offer a precise account of why these things happen. Like there are determinate explanations or causes out there that can tell us why two people end up at the clock at Grand Central. It's not undetermined. Aristotle doesn't want to say that. And yet, if we both end up there and we can't explain how that happened, that's exactly when we recur to the language of luck.
So it's more about our lack of understanding than about, as you kind of have put it, like something out there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, like, in a way, that might be an important theme of the whole book, that like why do we reach for luck? It's kind of an issue of intelligibility, or the limits of human reason. So in this case, in the physics, yeah, there are especially instances of human action that seem to be inexplicable. They almost seem to be something divine. Aristotle says, as if, a god is controlling all of this. They're important for our flourishing. I mean, other examples he gives, a person goes to the well, he's just had a bunch of salty food, but runs into some bad guys there and they kill him. Or you dig up some treasure in your backyard or discover some other natural resource there that makes you a bunch of money. Maybe we can't explain how these things happen. How, we can't offer a precise account of the intersection of the guy going to the well and the bad guys who end up killing him, but it's still super significant and it's going to strike you all the more for that reason. So right. I mean, Aristotle's interested in our own interest in these events that seem unpredictable, uncontrollable, and yet so meaningful for our happiness.
So again, why does he discuss this in the physics? Is it just because this is where he's talking about ITI, or?
I'm not sure I have a great answer. One thing to say, though, is that Aristotle does, and this is important for other parts of my argument too, I think, is that Aristotle wants to distinguish what happens by luck or chance, for that matter. Arguably uses two different terms there, 2K and automaton, from what happens of necessity, right? These things do not happen of necessity. I think that, Aristotle's fourfold explanatory causal account of things that happen in nature or through deliberate human action, as a person constructs a work of art, for example, has a different character precisely because these things are determinate, right? They depend on various kinds of necessity, and luck does not. So there, I mean, that does become important in later chapters of book 2 of the physics, that what's happening in nature is not happening by luck. And that's another way, in fact, that Aristotle is in conversation with those pre-Socratic atomists. And on one hand, he agrees with them that luck doesn't really explain anything, but then they also have things to say about luck or chance at the origins of the whole universe. And he doesn't want to say that. He doesn't want to say that we can identify nature with luck or chance.
So how does the conversation, or how does Aristotle's discussion in the physics of luck intersect or complement his discussion in Nicomachean Ethics, which is the subject of your largely the subject of your second chapter?
Yeah, thanks. So I think when you see that luck is not out there in the world determining human action from outside, you can make better sense of some of the things Aristotle says, for example, in Nicomachean Ethics 3:1 about the voluntary and the involuntary, because he offers this really capacious account of voluntary action, according to which a person, an agent, is responsible, at least in a causal sense, for actions that might seem to be compelled in part. Actions that he calls mixed because they seem to be both voluntary and involuntary, like you're sailing a ship and a storm hits, in which circumstances you decide the intelligent thing to do is to throw overboard all the precious cargo you're carrying, even though you're going to lose a lot of money. Is that a voluntary action? Aristotle says, yeah, it is a voluntary action because the pilot of the ship understands what he's doing. The action originates in him. He understands the particulars of the action. At the same time, you could say, I think totally reasonably, we'd understand what you mean. That was really unlucky. Like those were unlucky circumstances. You're still responsible for what you do in those circumstances. So I think Aristotle does not carve out chance from choice in the way that many modern theorists following Kant do. For them, anyone writing in the tradition of Kant and Rawls often makes a very sharp distinction between what you do because you've willed it, because you've chosen it, and what you've done because of some sort of outside pressure or because it was in your interest to do that thing. No, I mean, I think for Aristotle, as for many other Greek thinkers, it's precisely when you act in circumstances not of your choosing that we see whether you're virtuous or not. Like it might be the test of the pilot of that ship that he's able to get through the storm. Aristotle will say something similar about a general and the treatment of luck in the first book of the Nicomachean Ethics. It's exactly when a general encounters bad circumstances, unlucky circumstances, that we see what he's made of as a general. Maybe one other thing to say about this point, just like to give even more context about where the book is coming from, is that another literature that I had in mind as I looked at these texts was the literature on moral luck, beginning with Bernard Williams in particular. And I think Williams' insight that we can and do make ethical judgments, experience ethical emotions in circumstances that might seem to be unlucky as or in response to the outcomes of our deeds, even though they might seem to be unlucky. I think those insights are actually coming from Aristotle, like especially in this section of the text. So one thing I'm trying to do is to go back to the originals for those arguments, because I think they're more interesting even than Williams.
Well, maybe we could think a little bit about luck or some version of it in the wild and go to your argument concerning Oedipus Rex. I'm curious to hear you offer your take on what exactly is going on with luck, and particularly this concept of the daimon, which is a word, of course, that has very different meanings in very different texts. It seems, or does it? But in any case, yeah, maybe you could speak a little bit about your take on what's going on with chance and fortune in that play.
Well, in the first part of the book, in the first chapter, and then the second on Aristotle, I guess I'm trying to get a handle on 2K itself, on what I think it is, how we can understand it, and I tend in this skeptical and psychological direction. But then it seemed to me that I had to try to say something too about more traditional approaches. Why might it be really important to tell the story of bad luck? Even if it is a story, even if it's not out there in the world, it still might be a story worth telling. And man, if there's a guy who's unlucky, I think Oedipus is that guy. So in the third and fourth chapters of the book, I'm trying to clarify why you might want to go back to more traditional perspectives on first bad luck and then good luck. So bad luck in Oedipus the Tyrant, Sophocles' Oedipus the Tyrant, focusing on his daimon. And I guess, the argument is that the play is written in this ingenious way. When you read the scholarship on this play, some people want to say it's all about the gods. Like Oedipus is just determined by Apollo and the gods. Other people are like, no, even though, someone like Freud calls it a tragedy of destiny, that's not what it's about. These people often take inspiration from Bernard Knox or one of my mentors, Arlene Saxenhouse, that it's really a play about rational rule within the polis and the risks and dangers of that kind of rule. Other people say it's about these things together, right? That the play it's over-determined, and that makes some sense. Greek literature often works in that way. Everything seems to happen on two planes at once. I guess I want to say that the action of the play isn't over-determined, it's underdetermined. And the play is written in this amazing way such that at any moment, it's so difficult to say whether what's happening to Oedipus is something that he has done, something that the gods are doing to him, or a confluence of these things and certain circumstances. And the point is that we don't really know who we are, and even more importantly, what we do, until our lives are over, until we can see them at some distance. And it's that maybe divinely determined, in part, identity taking shape almost behind our back that is Oedipus's daimon.
Could you say a little bit more about the daimon, though? So what for you, or what's your understanding of the daimon?
I want to see the daimon as the shape of Oedipus's whole life in rune. It's his life. It's his life as it comes to be through his own deeds and through the influence on those deeds exercised by something demonic, by the gods, by the divine.
So is it kind of naming Oedipus in a way, naming the daimon as that thing that Aristotle says we're obsessed with calling luck, like the way that things kind of come together? Is this also, I guess I'm asking if this is a similar sort of linguistic move or question or a problem, really, that this is, the daimon is just Oedipus's own sense making? Because ultimately you argue that we're left kind of as aphoretic as, Oedipus is about why this has happened. Was it, that the riddle just kind of is endless. So I guess I'm curious if you see the daimon as, in a way, Oedipus's attempt at naming things in the way that Aristotle says we humans is interested in how humans are tempted to try to name and externalize something that maybe could be explained, or.
No, I think I want to say that Oedipus's daimon, the shape of his whole life in rune, shows us that he lives in a very different sort of universe than the one that Aristotle inhabits, that the one that Plato writes about when he's writing about Socrates, because Oedipus himself is a smart guy. He's extremely smart. His title to rule in Thebes is his ability to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, to move inductively from that weird riddle to the idea man. And yet, right, he doesn't know himself. I mean, I think Aristotle wants to say that you can know yourself because you can know what you do. Your activities have authoritative control over your character and should, in general lead to flourishing. There are extreme situations in which disaster can step in and make that impossible for a Priam or a Hecuba or something. But in this play, Oedipus is, he's practically wise, he's virtuous, and yet he comes to ruin because he doesn't know what he's doing. And so he has no control over his own happiness. It seems to me that if we live in a universe like the one constructed by Sophocles in this play, in which you can be such a person who seems to be, a kind of paragon of flourishing at the beginning and comes to be its total opposite, then bad luck remains a useful idea. If we live in a universe that is so unintelligible and inhospitable to reason and to virtuous action, then we need something like the idea of a daimon to explain how a life can be so upended and ruined. But I think for Aristotle, we don't live in such a universe. And that's why he says in a line that I repeat a few times in the book that it would be discordant, it would be wrong to think that luck has control over character and so is integral to flourishing itself, that we could sort of chalk up flourishing to good luck.
So I guess I want to maybe prompted by the fact that Oedipus, that the OT is one of Aristotle's quote unquote favorite plays. And this is much discussed in the scholarship on the Poetics. I mean, what would Aristotle say had happened here?
Yeah, what would Aristotle say had happened here? I mean, I do think Aristotle wants to say in the Nicomachean Ethics, in back to 3:1, that a person can be responsible for an action that he does not perform voluntarily. And so there he mentions regret as an indication of the voluntariness of action. And certainly Oedipus feels profound regret here. I mean, why Aristotle likes this play in particular, as he says in the Poetics, yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and it may have as much to do with the political significance of the play as it does with these questions about luck and the daimonic.
Well, I wonder too if it's partially because there are, like, also like in a play like Hippolytus, for example, where you have the action that happens within the play amongst the human actors, and I mean that in both senses, amongst the human actors, where you feel like maybe you can extract some meaning even if the characters attribute things to bad luck or whatever, you get some sense of their agency and can make an argument about why things evolved as they did. But then that all gets kind of thrown into chaos when you put a divine frame around it, that then I think like these things bump up against each other, creating just really interesting and difficult problems. Like in the OT, for example, I mean, if you just took away the idea of Apollo and the plague and all this kind of stuff, I think you can, fairly easily, and Aristotle could say, okay, well, even if Oedipus took these actions without full knowledge, he still took them, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you package the play and this whole thing about the divine, it creates all this sort of friction that raises, I think, all these questions that are the kinds of questions that people ask about their own lives. The same way that, like in Hippolytus, you think you can understand the action of it, but then when you wrap it up in a frame, it casts a different light on things, and I think it just presents all sorts of intellectual challenges. I don't know if that aligns with anything that you might think about it, but I guess I just wonder if maybe that's why Aristotle would be so interested in this place, because like almost multiple explanations that aren't necessarily complementary are being
offered for things. I don't know. I guess we could probably talk for hours about that. But
well, I mean, maybe just two very brief thoughts. I mean, I think you're right that this play is maybe uniquely philosophic. I find myself reaching in the interpretation here. I find myself reaching for Nietzsche and Arendt, maybe anachronistically. And I do want to say that the play leaves standing these problems about divine agency and human agency and responsibility. And in fact, one fault of the scholarship is that it often tries to resolve these problems when I think the play leaves them standing. So from a kind of philosophic perspective, I guess you can understand how Aristotle would be interested in it.
And he also obviously loves how the bad luck kind of emerges, right, through the combination of, peripetia and anagnorisis. That's like, his ideal is that's the mechanism of the luck, I guess, or what we would call the luck.
Yeah. I still wonder whether there are like political reasons for loving a play in which, a guy who might resemble someone like Pericles comes to ruin. Aristotle in the Poetics seems to think that it's like good for the demos maybe to watch these plays about elite families, about kings and tyrants messing up. I don't know if there's something about this guy too as an almost Athenian philosopher king type coming to ruin that could be politically salutary, but it seems possible.
Right. Well, could you maybe say a little bit about how does this first part of the book where you interweave Aristotelian or pseudo-Aristotelian, whatever you want to call it, kind of conceptualizations of fortune, good and bad. I mean, those sandwich our reading of the OT. How do you see this first part of this kind of theoretical part of the book as setting you up for your readings of Herodotus and Thucydides and Euripides, where you have some different angles on things, on, Herodotean critique of, a standardly read passage, for example? How did this theoretical stuff set up what you do in the second half of the book?
So the second half of the book is about politics, and it turns from definitions of luck, more searching philosophical accounts of good and bad luck, to luck in action, and luck in particular within democratic Athens. Not just within Athens. I mean, in Thucydides, I think one of the things we learn about luck is that regimes have different characteristic perspectives on luck. So at Sparta, there's a real sensitivity to bad luck that is somehow connected to Spartan piety, and that seems to shadow Spartan fear. I mean, every time like an earthquake happens or something, the Spartans see it as a significant piece of bad luck. But I'm definitely interested in the way the Athenians act in relation to luck, the way they think about and perceive luck. And so I offer a reading of Pericles' last speech, delivered amid the plague in Athens, where he sort of challenges the Athenians to keep their heads and, neither hope for good luck nor be cowed by the plague. And then I use what he says about the psychology of luck to read the rest of the history and to show how Thucydides seems kind of Periclean in this respect, and that he's also interested in thinking about hope from good luck and fear of bad luck from a kind of psychological, skeptical perspective. And also how Thucydides goes beyond Pericles in suggesting that we tend to reach for luck because we want what is happening to us to be meaningful in some way, whether good or bad. And I ground that idea in his commentary on the plague.
So could you say maybe a little bit more about how you ground it in his commentary on the plague?
Yeah. In Thucydides' commentary on the plague, he'll talk about the Athenians' reactions to getting sick on one hand and to getting better on the other. And when people fell ill, they were despondent, and they decided that they were condemned to death, sure to die. And when they got better, they had just the opposite reaction. They decided that they were never going to die again. And these two reactions to me seem to be of a piece, because they both suggest that, there's something special and almost inevitable about what's happening in these circumstances. It's as if, your fate is in the hands of the gods, or you want to say something beautiful and meaningful about it, when I think from Thucydides' perspective, it's just something that has happened. He says at the beginning of the plague passage, I'm just going to tell you what it's like. I'm not really interested in assigning responsibility. Some people say the Spartans poisoned the wells. Some people, might point to the fact that the plagues maybe started in Egypt and the Athenians had taken an expedition down there. So maybe the Athenians are, and Thucydides is like, I'm just going to show you what it does to the human body. And the discrepancy between what he shows you about the operations of nature and the way the Athenians want it to be so meaningful, I think, can help us to understand the different orientations toward luck in the work. When, stuff just happens, especially in war. But people are really interested in saying that was horrible, bad luck, or this is, really good luck, and the sort of thing that tends to happen to me. The Athenians often think that way. They trust in their good luck, or in the good luck of one of their generals, someone like Nicias.
Maybe as the last big picture question, you started by, when you were giving your account of the origins of the project, with a certain dissatisfaction with the scholarship on, or the history of reading luck in Thucydides, maybe. So where would you say that you ultimately, after looking at luck from so many different angles and in so many different classical Athenian texts, that you kind of land on Thucydides and luck?
That for Thucydides, luck is not something out there in the world, but that the perception of luck and its use in rhetoric remains super significant despite that fact, because it can motivate action in turn. And at the same time, I think some critics are kind of quick to transform Thucydides into a witness of human perversity and suffering, and that when we see luck isn't out there in the world, as maybe I said about Aristotle in a different context, we gain a renewed appreciation for judgment and voluntary action. And I think Thucydides, like Euripides and Trojan women, wants to emphasize human resilience, right? That action does remain up to us, even in really bad circumstances. That doesn't mean that it's totally up to us. It doesn't mean, we want to blame people in a punitive way for what they do. But I think the insight that luck isn't out there in the world can also be liberating in a certain sense, in that it suggests the possibility of resistance to ostensible fate, of going on together, to use that over term, even in the worst circumstances, which I think is something that the Athenians do in Herodotus and in Thucydides, and maybe in the weird guise of the Trojan women in Euripides.
Just as a quick follow-up question, do you think that Thucydides then is his take on luck effectively the same as his take on religion in general?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. There's a line in Leo Strauss's essay on Thucydides where he says something like, it's not the gods, but the belief in the gods that takes revenge on the Athenians when they go to Sicily. And for sure, I think there's something similar. There are definitely scholars who, writing about luck in Thucydides, say, certain things are just unlucky, like the eclipse that happens while they're in Sicily. If it hadn't happened in that moment, maybe they they do retreat. Demosthenes wants to retreat at that point, and Nicias says, to which I think I would just say, it's not the event itself, it's the response to the event, right, that keeps them in Sicily.
Right. And Thucydides, of course, portrays different responses, that it's not even a foregone conclusion what the response will be, that Demosthenes.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah, like in book 2, he says he can explain why eclipses occur at certain times.
Yeah. Great. Well, Dan, I've been ending each episode by asking, amid all the maybe what in pop psychology, when we might still attribute to be bad luck, whether rightly or wrongly, in the world, if there is anything that you've been reading or listening to or watching or doing that has been bringing you some joy lately.
Yeah, that's a great question. My wife is teaching a class on and really into the novelist Muriel Spark. And I've read a couple of her novels lately, and I think they're just incredible. And they don't really share that much with Thucydides, but she's the sort of Catholic maybe who has like a sense of human perversity and error from a different perspective, and weirdly takes a kind of joy in exposing it, and that feels like it has something in common with some of the texts that I really love.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks for the book, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Johanna. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Lesky Podcast. And special thanks for their support of the podcast to the Brown University Department of Classics and the John Nicholas Brown Center for Advanced Study. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And we'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to rate the podcast and leave a review. It will help other listeners to find us. We look forward to you joining us again soon here in the Lesky.